Classic Burning Crusade has been running now for over 11 months, and yesterday night, one of the hardest, if not the hardest, raid that Classic players have seen so far has been released, Sunwell Plateau. And this raid contains some of the most famous bosses in the history of WoW, like Kil'Jaeden, Brutallus, and most notably of course, Muru. So how did players in 2022 with years of knowledge and playing World of Warcraft do 15 years later? Well, without surprise, this raid got cleared very shortly after it got released. But what might surprise you is it actually took under 1 hour to do so, 52 minutes to be exact. When back in the day, it took 2 months for the guild SK Gaming to claim World First. But there's a catch to that we'll get to in a moment. Yesterday, to achieve this feat of strength, the Chinese World First guild Old School and a bunch of other guilds around the world had to resort to some insane tactics to pull off clearing this raid in under 1 hour. So today we're gonna see exactly how they did that and compare it to the original World First just for fun. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, first and foremost, it's worth noting that compared to any other full-length raid we've had so far in Classic, Sunwell Plateau is very straightforward and has very little trash in comparison. In fact, there's like 4 sections of trash in this raid, including a gauntlet, and most of it is cramped up very early in the instance. So, when guilds yesterday starting invis potting the first packs, rocket boosting through them, and just using petrification flasks at the end, this really set the mood for the rest of the race and the kind of tactics we were gonna see being used. This on its own saved all these top-end guilds probably 10 to 15 minutes of trash clearing, and filtered out the rest of the competition. Another really cool thing that we saw happened was from the guild Progress, who actually did Caligos with only 24 players. And the reason for this is because they sent a player ahead to start the Brutallus RP, so they could start on him right away after Caligos. Very smart. But ultimately, as you know, Progress did not get World First this time, unlike all the previous raid tiers. That title goes to the Chinese guild Old School, and we already started to get a glance as to why on Caligos and Brutallus. Their damage was off the charts, and they were pulling some insane numbers with a very unique hunter-heavy comp. No other guild had more than 1 or 2 hunters in their raid. Old School had 4, and they were all topping the meters. Anyways, after Brutallus, it was time for Felmist, which surprisingly enough, turned out to be the most lethal boss in this instance for these high-end guilds. My good friend Stay Safe TV was hosting this event showing a bunch of different POVs of different guilds, and we saw more wipes I think on this boss than any other bosses. If you don't know, the way Felmist works is she periodically chooses a random player, lifts them in the air, and starts dealing some huge arcane damage around them. This is called Encapsulate, so you need to split your raid in 4 groups, and whoever gets someone lifted in their group needs to run away from them. The thing is, this is highly RNG. You could get no encapsulates at all throughout this fight, or get a ton of them. And it seems like many guilds got very unlucky here. Either way, of course, the top 5 or 6 guilds had 0 wipes throughout this raid and kept going. Interestingly enough, there were no skips on the gauntlet after Felmist. It seems like there's no crazy stuff to do here, so all these guilds simply ran through it, killing the mobs. At a very fast pace of course, but going through it normally. So now, it's time for a bit of history. Back in 2008, when Sunwell released on March 25th, those 3 bosses we just saw, Caligos, Brutallus, and Felmist, were the only bosses available for a good 2 weeks. The rest of the raid was time-gated until the gate to the Eredar twins opened on April 8th, 2008. And in fact, even back in the day, it took guilds only 1 day to clear all 3 of those first bosses, where SK Gaming claimed World First Felmist on March 26th, just 1 day after Sunwell opened. So really, it seems like Sunwell, even back in the day, at least so far, was easy for those high-end guilds. And spoiler alert, this scenario where bosses only last a couple days after they're available will continue until Kil'Jaeden. Of course, the gatekeeping made it easier for those guilds because they could gear up on the previous bosses in preparation for the ones yet to release. Nevertheless, this doesn't compare at all to the insane 52 minutes clears of yesterday. But anyways, let's get back in the present. So after the gauntlet, it was time for Eredar twins. Yet again here, carried by their insane DPS and unique comp, the Chinese guild Old School managed to be way ahead of everyone else from this point on. The fact that this guild, which only got World 7th on the previous tier, managed to beat everyone this time around is very impressive, and I don't think anyone really expected that. Speaking of their comp, something else very unique about it is that those guys were running 2 Shadow Priests in this raid, allowing them to have essentially infinite mana and go for only 6 healers in their raid. 6 healers in a 25-man raid is crazy, even when you're very familiar with the raid. But doing it on the world first race and managing to pull it off is just insanity. As for Eredar twins, this fight is very healing intensive, and any mistake throughout this fight will ultimately lead to a wipe for sure. Someone doesn't move out with conflag, everyone wipes. A tank loses aggro at any point, wipe. Your tank forgets to get Shadow Nova on phase 2, they will die and you will wipe. But for those high-end guilds, it was no issue of course, and they all managed to one-shot this boss. After Eredar twins was the last time we saw some cool trash skips. As I said earlier, this raid has very little trash and most of it is cramped up. So if you manage to skip it, you'll be saving probably 30 to 45 minutes worth of trash clearing. And that's what Progress did here. Unfortunately here, Progress failed the first time they tried to do this and ended up wiping. And that's probably what cost them their world first. Of course, you don't want to do this at any other time than if you're doing a speedrun like this, because the trash in this instance drops some crazy loot, like actual weapons and gear pieces, patterns, and of course sun modes. So really, you don't want to skip any of it typically, but those guilds did it of course. Okay, now moving on to Muru. You may very well know this boss as the hardest boss in the history of WoW, because quote, it lasted for 40 days. Well, as you know now, that's missing some huge context behind it. The fact that Muru originally was gate capped until April 29th on US servers and April 30th on EU servers. And the fact that he died just 4 days later by the hands of the European guild SK Gaming on May 5th. Of course, Muru was undeniably very hard back in the day, and that's most notably due to the spell pushback he caused. Because specifically in phase 2, each one of those chain lightning effects Entropius does would spell pushback whoever got hit by them, and they happened every 3 seconds throughout the fight, hitting 1 additional person on each cast. And that's mainly the issue players had on Muru back in the day. Later on, Blizzard removed the spell pushback, and nowadays in Classic, we don't have it either, even though we do have the pre-nerf values. That's because the spell pushback was not a fun mechanic to deal with, to quote Brian Birmingham in BlizzCon. So how did the high-end guilds in 2022 do against Muru? Well, they one-shot him of course. Yet again here, old school's comp and insane DPS carried them throughout this fight and into Kil'Jaeden. But here's one very important thing you need to know to understand exactly why these guilds are doing so well nowadays compared to back in the day. You could argue it's because people have been playing World of Warcraft for 17 years. You could argue it's because we as players are just better gamers nowadays. You could argue it's because we have access to more resources to learn the game, how to optimize our DPS, what consumables to use to gain 2 DPS instead of 1, or that we've been playing private servers since they were a thing. And all of these things are definitely all true, but the main reason is because of the PTR servers. Blizzard used to not do this at the start of Classic, but it seems like they value quality of content to surprise and novelty nowadays. Every raid tier in Classic, since Zul'Gurub to Sunwell, we've had a PTR server up where we could test the content, report bugs, and most importantly, practice with our guilds there. And I guarantee you, all of these guilds we just saw did that, and even more on private servers. If we didn't have the PTR, those guilds could still have practiced on private servers of course, but there's no way we'd see the insane times we just saw. Private servers are just very inaccurate, be it in the values, the patrols, the mechanics, the way your class plays, and a bunch of other small things like that. The PTR servers are the real reason why these guilds did what they did yesterday. Anyways, finally, of course, after Muru came Kil'Jaeden, and as you know, the Chinese guild Old School claimed world first on this. They had a super clean fight, super clean run overall, and the rest of the guilds followed shortly after, with Avatar and Progress on EU servers, and then the guild Welcome on Benediction US. Huge congrats to these guilds and their awesome performance. As for me, with my guild, we managed to clear up to and including Eredar twins. wins, and we're about to sink our teeth into Muru tonight as I'm writing this. Sunwell has always had a very special place in my heart since I was a kid, because patch 2.4 was when I started to play the game, and I remember making it to level 70, going into the Isle of Quel'Danas, and seeing the gates of Sunwell. This infamous raid that players said back in the day only welcomed the elite players. 15 years later, here I am clearing it with my guild. This is why this raid is so special to me. But what has your experience been so far? Have you set foot in Sunwell yet, or are you just casually leveling or gearing up and preparing for Wrath? One thing is for sure, in Wrath of the Lich King, we will see some incredible and beautiful raids releasing, like Ulduar or ICC, but also some very forgettable ones like TOC or Naxxramas. Either way, I can't wait to see the race to World First for these raids, and we will definitely be covering it on this channel, so you know what to do. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to give it a like and subscribe to the Classic WoW Curios channel for more content like this. My name is Numidia, and I will see you guys in the next one very soon. Bye for now.